Assalamualaikum everyone at Jakarta Islamic School. My name is Mr. Aren and I'm here to help you today with your English. So today I want to talk to you about poems. Now everyone knows what a poem is. It's something that's very popular, especially for younger children. But today I want to talk to you about a special type of poem. Now this poem is called a narrative poem. Narrative poems are poems that tell us a story in detail. So what is a narrative poem? So I want to explain that to you first today. So let's go. So, like I said, a narrative poem is a poem that tells us a story. So, it could be anything. It could be something that's real life, or it could be something that has been made up. So, we would call that make-believe. So, something that is real, or something that is make-believe. So, before I give you some examples of some narrative poems, I want to talk to you about what makes a narrative poem. What are the elements? What makes the poem a narrative poem instead of a normal poem? So, let's talk about the elements. So, firstly, narrative writing or poems that tell stories, they have a setting. A setting is where the poem takes place. So it could be in a house, on the beach, it could be anywhere. So it's the place where the poem takes place. Next, the narrative writing, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So it has a sequence. We call it a sequence. A beginning, middle, and end. And like I've said before, it could be a real story. It could be something that's really happened, or it could be make-believe, something that hasn't really happened. So let's go into a little more detail. So let's start with the setting first. The setting is where the story takes place, and it is where the main characters are introduced to us. So it's where we get to know who the main characters of the story are. Then we have a middle. And the middle is where the main story begins, and maybe a problem or an adventure is introduced to us. So it's where the story starts to be told. And obviously at the end is where the adventure finishes or the problem is solved and the story comes to an end. So we have the main idea of a text. The main idea of the poem is the most important part of the poem, and it's usually explained with like a sentence or maybe even two sentences. So the first element of narrative writing or narrative poetry is that it always tells us a story. I have an example for you. One fine morning, a mother kangaroo was worried because her baby was missing. In confusion, she hurried. So this is telling us a story. is telling us that the mother kangaroo is worried, and it is in the morning. So let's start with the first. It's in the morning, one fine morning. A mother kangaroo was worried. So it's telling us the setting, which was in the morning, and a mother kangaroo was worried because her son was missing. So that is the problem. That's the middle of the poem. So the mum was worried because her son or her baby was missing. In confusion, she hurried. That is the end. She's trying to find her son or her baby. So the next thing that I want to talk to you about is the setting. We described this before, but I want to go into more detail with you. So as you know, in many stories, a story starts with the word once upon a time. Once upon a time. Why do you think that is? I'm going to tell you. So we use once upon a time as the setting. It helps us to introduce the characters first. Once upon a time. Now it gives us a certain time that we're talking about. Once upon a time. So let's think of a story, for example. Once upon a time there was a little girl named Goldilocks. So it's telling us and helping us introduce a character to the poem or the story. So like any story, narrative poetry, it has a setting. So the setting lets us know where, when, and who. So the time, the place, and the characters. That is the same in almost every story. So the characters, they could be humans like us, they could be animals, or they could be anything. They could be any other creature, maybe a fairy or a monster. It could be anything. So to help you understand this, let me show you guys a picture and let's describe what we can see here. So let's start with the setting. What can we see in the setting? We can see that there is a small boy and he is on the beach. We can see the trees, we can see the sand, the ocean, and it looks like a very nice day. You can see the blue skies. And he is holding something. He is holding a message in a bottle. So that message could be even a treasure map or something else that's very interesting. And he found that in the bottle that you can see laying on the sand. So we can use this to describe what is happening in the picture. What I think is happening is a young boy was walking along the beach on a very nice hot day, and he found a bottle, and in that bottle was a hidden message. So he's opened the bottle and pulled out the message. Maybe it's a treasure map, maybe it could be anything. And this could be the start of an adventure. So this is the beginning of the story. So a young boy was walking along the beach. That tells us the character and tells us the setting on a very hot day, and he comes across a bottle with a hidden message. So that is the beginning of the story. Another thing that you might find in a narrative poem is when the story has an opinion. So it could be something like one fine morning, like we discussed before. One fine morning. The fine morning is someone's opinion. It could have been a rainy morning. It could have been a stormy morning. But one fine morning is saying that one good morning. So that is using someone's opinion. The poem also states that the mother kangaroo was worried. That's another opinion. He could maybe, because he's trying to paint the picture of what's happening in the story. So one fine morning, the mother kangaroo was worried. So in the first two lines of the poem, it states two opinions. One fine morning, and the mother kangaroo was worried. So, like I said before, in a narrative poem, and even in any story, there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. So, let's think, for example, let's think about chickens. So first you have an egg, that is the beginning, and then you have a chick, which is the middle, and in the end, the chick grows up to be a chicken. So the egg is the beginning, the chick is the middle, and the chicken is the end. Now, narrative poems and stories, they have the same thing. They have a beginning, which is where we get introduced, like we said before. You have a middle, where it talks about a problem or maybe the start of an adventure. And then you have the end, which ends the story. So maybe the problem is solved or the adventure has finished, like I said before. So let me give you a little example of a poem that I know, and we will discuss the elements of that poem. So let's start. Two little kittens on one stormy night began to quarrel and began to fight. One kitten had a mouse and one kitten none. That's how the fight begun. The old woman took the sweeping broom and swept them both right out of the room. The ground was covered with frost and snow. They had lost the mouse and had nowhere to go. So they lay beside the door until the old lady had finished sweeping the floor. And then they crept in as quiet as mice, all covered in snow and cold as ice. They found it much better that stormy night to sit by the fire instead of quarrel and fight. Now, I want to talk to you about that poem and the elements that it gives us, the elements that it shows us. So let's start with that. So let's start with the setting. So did the poem have a time and a place? Yes, it did. It had a time. It was one stormy night, and it had a place. So they were in the house, right? It let us know that they were in the house. So it had a time and a setting and a place. The poem introduced the two main characters to us, and they were the two kittens that were fighting. It had a beginning where the two kittens were fighting over the mouse. It had the middle where the kittens were swept outside and left outside. And then it had an end where the kittens had stopped fighting about the mouse and sat by the fire. So it had a beginning, a middle, and an end. So now I want to show you one of my favorite poems that tells us a story. So it's talking about a squirrel and a fish, and a fish that cannot climb trees because obviously fish are in the water. So let me just show you this poem, and I hope you enjoy it.
The fish that couldn't climb trees. Simon the fish splished and splashed and dashed about the river weeds. He whizzed and whooshed and twisted through the water round the sticks and reeds. He swam at speed this way and that, jumped from the water with a spin. He felt the air against his scales, then grinned a grin and plopped back in. "Hey fish, hey fish," he heard as he was flying through the morning air. He stopped and looked towards the bank and saw a squirrel standing there. "Hey fish, I see you swim quite well," he sneered. "You're not as good as me. I'll bet that you're no good on land. I'll bet that you can't climb a tree." With that, he shot straight up a tree and stood there with a splendid stance, stared down at Simon from the top and danced a little squirrel dance. Simon struggled through the shallow waters by the river bank, and as he flopped across the mud, his little fishy heart it sank. As hard as he could flap his fins, as hard as he could thrash his tail, as hard as he could push himself, he knew that he was bound to fail. He couldn't make it through the mud, the twigs and all the fallen leaves. He couldn't make it to the trees, no, he could only gasp and wheeze. "Ha ha," laughed Squirrel, "you're no good. You shouldn't try, you shouldn't oughter. Stay off my land and out my trees. You're like a fishy out of water." Simon sank back to the depths, right down to hug the riverbed. So sad that he could not climb trees, he shrugged his fins and shook his head. "How I wish I could climb trees," he sighed and cried. He felt depleted. Simon slinked behind a rock. He felt so sad he was defeated. Squirrel danced upon his branch, guffawing, giggling and hooting. Then he spluttered and he coughed. He tripped and slipped and lost his footing. Squirrel screamed, and as he fell, he flapped his arms to no avail. He fell into the stream below, a massive splash. He whooped and wailed. He burbled and he babbled, bubbles bursting as he paddled, and the current pulled him under as he splished and splashed and scrappled. Squirrel thought, "Now this is it. I cannot swim, I'm bound to drown." He grumbled and he tumbled through the water as it dragged him down. But then came Simon, swimming fast. "At last," thought Squirrel, "help is here." And Simon pulled him through the water, tugging Squirrel's fluffy ear. Squirrel gasped the morning air, clever Simon pushed and heaved. Then out they flopped onto the bank and squelched into the muddy leaves. Squirrel panted, "Thank you, fish. That was so very good of you, to fish me from the water after I behaved like such a fool." "That's all right," said Simon Fish. "You acted like a silly clown, but that's no reason not to help. I couldn't sit and watch you drown." Next day the squirrel came with friends. He pointed, "Everyone, that's him. He's the fish that saved my life. Oh, Simon, teach us how to swim." So Simon spent the morning teaching squirrels how to doggy paddle, then the breaststroke and front crawl, until they were quite tired bedraggled. Now, if any danced on branches, lost their footing and fell in, they could swim back to the bank and climb back up their tree again. To give their thanks, some carried Simon to an overhanging branch and watched him dive into the water as others sat and had their lunch. They clapped and cheered as Simon span so deftly through the air, and then, on Wednesdays there's a competition. They watch and mark him out of 10.
I hope you liked that story and that poem. And I think that's all we have time for today. So I guess I'll see you next time, guys. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.